Hi, everybody. I think we'll get started. So hello and welcome, everybody, to day 2 of Surety Week. I'm Daniel De Burca. I'm the Head of Public Affairs at ICISA, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. Hopefully you can all hear and see us properly. I just want to take us through a little bit of background and some housekeeping as well before we kick off, and also refer to some of the sessions we had yesterday. We had some really interesting presentations and discussions. Hopefully some of you had a chance to see those. The feedback we've received so far has been fantastic, and we're really pleased with that, even with the odd technical glitch. But I guess we are used to technology failing us as much as it has saved us throughout the pandemic, although maybe that was us failing the technology. Surely not, of course. We're going to kick off our panel in just a moment. If I could ask you, if you're not on the panel, to make sure that your camera and your microphone are off. They should be off by default, but just please make sure that that is the case. We are also recording this session, so you will also be able to view the session later. We will put it up on our YouTube page at a certain point in time, and those who are registered will be able to access it. So if you want to view this again, you can, but also if you want to view any of the other sessions, please register for those. We've got quite a lot of interesting presentations, discussions going on throughout the week, so please make sure to take part in those as well. Okay, let's get going. Actually, one more really important point is our chat is open, and we really want people to take part in this. We really want to see some excellent questions, some hard questions. That's what the panel is here for. And please give us your thoughts and your opinions as we're going along. But a little bit of background first. Obviously, the pandemic has been top of everyone's agenda in the last 2 years or so, but a lot of other issues have been bubbling along under the surface that were priorities before this happened, and sustainability is clearly one of those things that was gaining a huge amount of prominence and importance for financial services, for businesses, for society in general. And we in ICISA have been looking at this a lot. I've been at ICISA since the start of 2020, and it's been one of the really top subjects that we've looked at. We've actually been surveying our members throughout that time to gauge opinion and see how they respond to these kind of topics. And what we're seeing is there's a lot of interest, a lot of awareness already, but that interest is continuing to grow over time. And I think that's really important. We're seeing that it's not just about internal processes, it's also about external positioning and making sure that what our members do is impacting the environment, impacting the world, impacting societies in a positive way. And that's something that we're trying to encourage. But obviously, it's about walking the walk as much as talking the talk. Although with that said, we're about to spend 50 minutes talking the talk. So we'll get going. Martin, oh, sorry, yes, I must also introduce the panel. That's one of the most important parts of it. I'm very pleased to have a very distinguished panel of experts in this field with us today. We have Martin Stauda, who's the topic lead for sustainability in Swiss Re Corporate Solutions, credit and surety franchise, and works as the lead underwriter for mining and metal financings in their commodity finance team. I also have Pamela Schurman, who's the principal expert on insurance policy at IOPA and works quite a lot on sustainability. And I've got Giel Lindhorst, who is executive director of the Partnership for Carbon Accounting Financials, PCAF. You'll hear a lot more from them as we're going on. But Martin, if I can start with you, what does sustainability mean for you and Swiss Re Corporate Solutions, and how are you responding to the challenge of becoming more sustainable as a business?
Thanks very much, Daniel, for the kind introduction and for the great opportunity to be on this panel today. Normally, I would have said sustainability is the hottest topic of these days. With the sad news on the political agenda yesterday, unfortunately, this is no longer true. And I think in the short term, we will probably see different priorities also on the business side. Nevertheless, in the long run, I'm convinced that sustainability will be the key challenge for all of us going forward after that political crisis has been resolved, hopefully. How do we define sustainability at Swiss Re? We have a very broad definition. It means sustainable progress is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet theirs. So, I mean, that's pretty broad. So the question is, how do we put this into practice? We have on the corporate agenda until 2030, we have 3 top priorities. One is mitigating climate risk and support the energy transition. The second one is building societal resilience. And the third, driving affordable insurance with digital solutions. So the last 2 points are actually meant to essentially close the protection gap for risks that result from climate change, be it on the country or community level, and on the digital side, more on the individual level. More generally, sustainability has always been a top priority for Swiss Re, and we are considered one of the industry leaders in this field. Concretely, we see the carbon emissions as the most pressing topic, and we have set ourselves a very ambitious agenda to work on this. We are starting in our operations, where we want to be net zero by 2030. Then the next part is asset management, where we want to reduce our carbon emissions in our portfolio by 35% until 2025. And the last and most difficult part is actually our underwriting activities, where we want to become net zero by 2050. But that's probably the part where the most work needs to be done. In addition to that, we have a lot of research on the topic of sustainability, and I can only recommend the audience to check our website at swissre.com/sustainability. And there's a lot of very interesting research. Personally, I can recommend a series that's called Economics of Climate Change, which provides a lot of insightful data. Thanks.
Excellent. And then, Pamela, if I turn to you, obviously the regulatory agenda and the regulatory environment is spurring a lot of action. What is IOPA's approach on this topic, and what is it that you expect to see from insurers, and what is it that you want to see from them?
Thanks, Daniel, and hello, Martin and Giel. Nice to see you this morning, and thanks for inviting IOPA on this panel. So, what is the regulatory approach or the supervisory approach for the insurance sector from IOPA? Since 2018, not so long ago, I would say, we have been working on sustainability issues for the insurance and pension sector, and we've been developing some opinions, some advice to the Commission, where we have, let's say, build our concepts and the core elements of what we would like to develop as a sustainability approach for the sector. And now we have in 2022, 2024, we will really consolidate that. So we have it as a strategic priority next to digital finance, another hot topic. Unfortunately, indeed, we have other hot topics, but not in the insurance regulatory sector today. So it's really a strategic priority. That's the first thing. We have 7 areas on which we will continue focusing, and our approach is to go deeper, not broader, because it's quite a vast topic where we're not climate scientists. We are regulatory and a supervisory authority. So we are focusing on the area of prudential treatment. We could discuss that. We have been doing some risk analysis on transition risk. We're conducting physical risk analysis at macro level. We are focusing the other pillar. The third pillar is, of course, the disclosure and the reporting, where very important work is being done internationally, but also in Europe. And then, of course, we have to translate this all into supervision, which is also tough enough. And indeed, as Martin mentioned, we have taken a keen interest in protection gaps. And this is our catch-all phrase, because we see protection gaps. We see gaps in insurance coverage for different reasons. So we should look at that too. And then let's say the sixth pillar, if you count it with me, is about looking at ways to improve collection of data, but also ways to improve maybe the accessibility of data. And we see European initiatives, the ASAP, but we also see initiatives in the sector for open source data and so on. So and we would like to see how we can do that. And all of that in a context where we try to cooperate with international organizations, because it's not a one-man show, it's a global issue, and we should all build upon each other so that we make progress faster rather than all inventing the wheel. So that's a bit our approach, let's say, strategically. We've given a lot of focus on climate change, but we will also start working on social aspects. But that's, of course, still an area for us also to discover further. Now, maybe there are two things I would like to mention, not to do a spoiler alert, and there are many things we can discuss during the panel. But the first approach, the first very important thing for a prudential supervisor was to establish or to recognize these risks that are due to climate change. So I'll focus on climate change, to recognize them as prudential risks. And I know you will maybe asking about the carrots and the sticks, Danielle, today, and I think that's the big carrot for an insurer. I mean, if it's a prudential risk, it goes to the interest of an insurer to manage that risk. And that's the approach we take. We have to work with risks, yeah? But then, of course, the other, so we've been working on these risk assessments. The second big step, once you have gotten your head around it as a prudential supervisor, that actually there are transition risks, there are physical risks which affect the assets and the liabilities, then the question is, okay, what are we going to do? Are we going to impose capital requirements or change the capital requirements? And then you have all these issues. Or do we first go into an area where we would like to companies to identify these risks and manage these risks? So we went into the pillar 2, and that was the big next step once we had a clarity on the risks. And you've seen that last August, the delegated regulation on Solvency II, so the regulatory framework has been adapted, and it has really, based on EIOPA's advice, integrates sustainability risks in Pillar 2. And then the other point I wanted to make on that, it's not just the risk assessment, so the outside in, or the risks to the assets and the liabilities, but we've also integrated in Solvency II the inside out. And that is this double materiality, which we've taken from the start, which is not easy to implement, because then you turn into some call it divination, or some call it, how do you measure then the impact of an insurer on sustainability, and how can you influence an investment strategy on risk-based, truly risk-based approaches. So we have integrated sustainability in the prudent person principle. So we expect insurers to look at the impact they have with their investment strategy, but in practice, we have to work on that with the insurers. What does it mean? And then the second point is we've also paid a lot of attention to the liability side for insurers, because investments, many people are covering that, but we are, as an insurance supervisor, we have to look at the liabilities, and that really reflects this very specific role. And then we can discuss later on the role of insurers. How can an insurer actually contribute to adapting or mitigating climate risk? And that's what we call impact underwriting. And there, I think that's the big carrot for a company. If we see that climate change is increasing losses, is making insurance potentially more expensive, it goes to the sustainability of the insurance business itself to actually incentivize reduction of losses. And that can be done through different ways. So that is, and then of course the big question is whether there is even a bigger carrot, CQ capital requirements. Well, we're working on that, but I'm not sure we are there in the market to give carrots away. It's very difficult also to get a risk-based approach there. So thank you.
Yes, some really interesting angles for us to take this discussion in. And as I mentioned, if there are any questions as we're going through this, please put them into the chat. But to turn to you, Giel, for a second. Martin and Pamela both mentioned things like carbon emissions and understanding how those function within an organization. Your organization, PCAF, is helping financial institutions to look at and better understand the emissions related to their activities. Can you talk a little bit about how you do that and why it's important?
Yes, thanks, Daniel. Yeah, great to be on this panel, and great to speak to you all about the role and the work PCAF has been doing. PCAF, the Partnership for Carbon Accounting Financials, is an open network of financial institutions for financial institutions. So it's led by financial institutions, and with the main focus to harmonize and globalize the measurement of emissions related to all types of financial activities. And we started mainly focusing on loans and investments. PCAF started in the Netherlands in 2015. Then it moved to North America in 2018, 2019, and then after that it was globalized. But led by the financial institutions with the core focus to standardize the measurement of emissions related to all activities in the portfolio, and of course also to grow the network of financial institutions to over 250 is the end goal for this year, but we're already at over 220. So we're fast growing at the moment, and that's due to the fact that the measurement of emissions and the standard that PCAF has created has been integrated into other initiatives as well. So we have been partnering with the Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance to integrate this type of measurement in also their net zero frameworks. Same for the banking, but also with the insurance sector, the Net Zero Insurance Alliance. We currently collaborate to develop this standard for measuring emissions related to insurance underwriting. And with the standard that we currently have already established and published in November 2020, that standard already insurance companies can start measuring for their asset management arm. There was not a standard yet for the underwriting. That's currently under development, but we already have the standard out, which was also approved by the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. So it's an official standard backed by the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, and that's why this standard was also integrated and now recommended by the TCFD. So the TCFD requires or recommends banks, asset owners, asset managers to measure emissions using this standard for their loans and investments. And already in the TCFD update, also the project that we started with the Net Zero Insurance Alliance to start working on methodologies for insurance underwriting was already referenced. So yeah, a lot of eyes are on this project to deliver from both the Net Zero Insurance Alliance. They have made ambitious commitments to
Seem to have lost Giel for a moment. Hopefully he pops back in a second. I think if I move on to you, Martin, for a moment.
The call is of course closely monitored. I dropped off for a minute.
Yes, you're back again.
I'm back. Yeah, sorry, I don't know what happened, but yeah, so we will publish in about a month a scoping document from the work we do with the Net Zero Insurance Alliance. So yeah, that document will be important. We'll explain what we initially want to cover in emission accounting for insurance underwriting, and what type of approaches we have been discussing with the group, which is at the moment 16 insurance and reinsurance companies that work on this method development.
Great.
I'm happy to explain more on this in this call.
Yeah, for sure. And if anyone has any questions about that or is interested in more, we're happy to direct them towards you as well. One of the topics that was mentioned there is around impact underwriting, and Martin, one of the interesting things I suppose about the surety sector when it looks at sustainability is that a risk being more sustainable doesn't necessarily make it a better credit risk. Does that make it more difficult when you consider your underwriting practices around sustainability?
of course, it makes it more difficult. I mean, question is where do we come from historically? In the past, the focus has always been to avoid those risks. So those risks that are kind of bad from a sustainable perspective, and that's while still there's a lot of analytical work required, and we have done that work. It's relatively easy to actually define what you don't want to do. I mean, just to name a few of the sector-specific guidelines we have developed at Swiss Re. We have separate guidelines on animal testings, on dams, on defense, forestry, pulp, paper, oil palm mining, nuclear, thermal coal, oil and gas, and these are all constantly updated, so that's the focus of the past and still today to avoid negative risks with a specific focus on those areas. Going forward, when you actually want to grow the EU sustainable business, then the key question is how actually do you define it? Taking an example from coal mining, we have stated we no longer support thermal coal mining. The question then, when it comes to surety, is do we provide a bond for the construction contractor that builds the road to the thermal coal mine? So there's a lot of questions in the area that are not yet clearly defined and answered. So there's a lot of more work required, and it's also fair to say that for business that we consider as sustainable, we do not have any economic benefit in our costing parameters, and that makes it extremely difficult, because if the underwriter gets a deal that is a green bond but pays 10 bips less than a normal bond on the same counterparty, then essentially these 10 bips will have to come from his P&L, and that's the current status quo, but I don't think that it is a viable long-term solution. So that is work that needs to be done on the corporate level, but also with the regulators to make sure in the long run there is also an economic incentive for underwriters and companies to improve their share of sustainable business.
Yeah, and Pamela, if I move to you on this, then does this aspect, this kind of, or just specialty sectors in general, does that make it a harder case for you as a regulator, or do general principles apply in the same way, or just in slightly different ways?
Yes, thanks, Daniel and Martin. And it's true, we have to start from the premise that today there is no evidence that sustainability investments or underwriting make it a better credit risk. Yeah, that's something, and we've seen recent ESMA publication that even credit rating agencies, they have completely different opposing views on the impact of ESG factors on credit ratings. So that we don't see it. But maybe to take it from another perspective is, if we take climate change, it is a source of credit risk, and I think that's where also if I may, I'm not a specialist in surety insurance, but where surety insurers also have a very important role in promoting then the transition is really to identify and to recognize how physical and transition risks can impact actually on a project or on an infrastructure project. So that is, I think, the first really invaluable role of a surety insurer, is that these insurers and other insurers have a very good knowledge of risks. And that's what they bring into the counterparty default assessment. So that's really very important. And I think whereas also how much a surety insurer can then contribute to make even an unsustainable activity or an unsustainable project more sustainable, that really depends on I think on how the contractual terms of such an insurance coverage, or how the involvement is with the different parts of the project. And there I think also, if you talk of impact underwriting, the question is how far can an surety insurer support actually an unsustainable project to become more sustainable. Because one thing is to move away from covering actually economic activities, which are today economic activities, and turning away, leaving the market for other insurers, and then maybe losing indeed some business there in the short term, or supporting indeed certain projects to transition. And that is through, I think, risk identification is very important, but also the sharing, for example, of risk assessments with public entities. For example, if you're talking of critical infrastructure, there can be opportunities to actually see how the risks could be mitigated, also through public standard setting. So we hear very often in the public, in the impact underwriting aspect, that insurers are not there to set standards or to set building standards. And that's why it's so important that these insurers also engage with public authorities. So those were just a few of my ideas around credit risk and actually the role of surety insurers in promoting transition.
Yeah, I don't know if either of you have any, Kilo or Martin, if you have a reply to that. Otherwise, I would say, a lot of this comes down to data, I would suspect, and making sure we have good data on these kinds of risks. I assume what you're doing is heavily driven by data and the quality of data. What is the environment like for data? Is there good information out there, and is it reliable? And yeah, what would you say about the quality of data available to us?
Yeah, indeed, data availability and data quality is key in indeed the measurement. I always say it's not data availability, but data accessibility. Because I think the data is there, but it's not accessible to you. For instance, every small and medium enterprise pays an energy bill, and yeah, through the energy bill you can estimate the emissions of most of the companies out there. So yeah, having a form of access to that type of consumption, energy consumption, would already help. And yeah, so I think it's more about accessibility and of course then also the quality of that the type of information that you receive is important. What we have created in PCAF is a data quality scoring, and that system is very valuable and powerful as well, because it helps financial institutions to focus on the aspects where it really matters. And so and that system works with a 5-level score, where 5 is scored for really, well, proxy data, sector average data. So you hardly have any information of your client. You know only that it's in a specific sector. Then you could use proxy data like sector average data on emissions per revenue of that type of client. And that's low level quality. And top level quality would be reported emissions by a client. And we know that a lot of also small and medium enterprises, they don't report on emissions, so you have to start probably often with this type of measurement with proxy data. But doing that, you can get a good feel of where are the emissions over my portfolio. And of course, as mentioned, we still have to develop the underwriting methodologies, but in principle, it would work the same. You apply a methodology, use proxy data to get a quick screening of where are the emissions in our underwriting portfolio, and where is the data quality worst, you could say. And those areas where you have hotspots with poor quality data are the areas where you have to focus, because it could be that a large part of your portfolio has really low emissions, but only a few sectors pop up where you have high emissions and where you have also low quality data. So doing this analysis, starting with proxy data, is really valuable to in the next phase, focus on certain parts of your portfolio that really matter. And then, of course, collaborating with all types of stakeholders is key. Also moving to new digital solutions, as mentioned before, to capture this type of data. Like in Europe, this open source data platform that's being developed. I think that's a very important development. And financial institutions should be able to easily access those type of data without any costs. If there would be a cost burden, then only the larger financial institutions could finance this. But this should be open to any financial institution to tap into this type of data, especially when it comes to climate data. And one example which is inspiring is, for instance, it's of course on another side of the business, but in the Netherlands, financial institutions have been working together with the Bureau of Statistics and actually grid operators to get access to energy data of companies, but also of households, to measure emissions related to their mortgage portfolio and to their business loan portfolio. And they succeeded in that. So they found ways to have the Bureau of Statistics aggregate this type of data to do the measurement. And I think this is an example that can be copied in other countries, other jurisdictions as well, to see how can we collaborate with all types of stakeholders to get access to this type of data.
Great. Looking towards the chat and some of the questions there's an interesting question about new technologies, which you kind of touched on as well, Giel. And I suppose one of the issues is that a lot of new technologies either have we're not aware of their impact, or we're not aware of maybe their credit risk because they're very new as well. And a lot of these things that are geared towards maybe being more sustainable as well. And does that play a part in your thinking, Martin, from underwriting, say, when it comes to new technologies as well?
I mean, the question is, where would we look at we as credit and surety operator, we're not equity investors, so we would kind of on the underwriting side probably be cautious taking risk on something that is untested. On the other hand, for sustainability, I mean, as Giel mentioned, data is the key challenge. So on that side, using new technology in our operations to become better in using data, I think there we're open to test cutting edge things. So it's really important at which side of the house you're looking at. And following up on what Giel said, I would really echo that data is the key challenge. On our underwriting side, we have a very large degree of small and medium-sized enterprises that we cover as credit risk, where we do not have much data on their sustainability performance, and in particular not on carbon emissions, and that really makes it difficult to measure the impact of the overall portfolio, and it also makes it more difficult to assess the performance of individual companies relative to sector average performances. So I would say in the medium term, it will be very important for each also small and medium-sized company to work on that side and get the data, because I'm convinced that in a couple of years from now, you will only get attractive insurance terms if you are able to provide that data, because otherwise you will be measured against industry averages, which might not be in your favor.
Yeah. I think Pamela, that kind of sounds like it's moving towards some of that kind of greater impact underwriting that you're mentioning. Is that the type of thing that you're hoping for, and are there other ideas out there that you've heard that sound like they might work?
No, thank you. I think everything that Giel and Martin say, it all echoes with me. I just maybe on the one hand, it is about an insurer investing or providing insurance coverage for certain digital technologies, and there you have to be indeed you have to be able to assess the risks. But on the other hand, what I maybe would like to add is also the use by insurers of certain digital technology. So you have to balance also maybe the carbon footprint of becoming a smart insurer. But on the other hand, there are potential benefits of having, let's say, automated payouts in case of certain coverages, which can increase the resilience after disasters, etc. So it's quite multifactorial. So one hand, as an insurer, do you invest or do you cover? And you need different types of information for that. And on the other hand, what we hear very often is that digital is also an opportunity for increasing the financial inclusion, for example, or to promote financial inclusion through smarter contracts, faster payouts. So we all have to balance that. And I think there is a very large, I wouldn't say untapped, but something I would have to delve into a bit more is this always this link between sustainability and digital. I mean, the enormous consumption of energy, but on the other hand, maybe contributing to more resilient society by providing smarter insurance solutions. And what I think in many of these innovative approaches, and as we see on sustainability, but then also on digital, is it's always this risk of this regulatory risk, which has occurred in sustainable finance, solar power, subsidies, not subsidized, new technologies, market sentiment, etc. On digital, I think you can't require regulatory stability, but it is an important factor, I think, to cover, invest, or use all these solutions.
Yeah, it's very true. We also have a question about working on the social aspects. It was directed towards you, Pamela. I think you mentioned how we can also look at not just the climate impact, but I think that's something that's occasionally missed out of the discussion on sustainability, is that it's not just about climate risks. Obviously, that's a very key part, but there's also social aspects, human rights aspects, and wider kind of economic elements to it as well. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I would be happy to hear Martin and Giel on that, because we're starting actually, to be honest. But it's true, we've been given a mandate from the Commission to work on assets and activity, the prudential treatment of assets and activities that are linked to social objectives and also environmental. But so there we have the word social. And what is a difference with environmental? Now we've come to terms with what are the risks and how they translate potentially in prudential risk. On social, I find it more difficult. There's a lot of self-referral in the factors and the risks. So first, again, here we have to say, okay, what are the categories of social risk? We have the SFDR indicators. We know the work that the platform on sustainable finance is conducting in identifying, in potentially having a report on social taxonomy, but still it is difficult for an insurance supervisor to say, well, these are the risks and that's how they can translate in. So that's a big effort we have to make. Even though we have some indicators, but I find it difficult, the number of violations in which an economic activity has been mentioned in violating the UN Global Compact. And very often what we see in the ORSAs today, well, the ORSAs of 2019, let's say, that's the information we have, it's treated as a reputational risk. So we have, again, to go through the motions of identifying the risk, the transmission channels, and then seeing how they could be treated better in Pillar 2. And then we're far away from a prudential risk differential on social and non-social assets. But I'd rather hear the others speak, maybe.
Yeah, indeed, Martin.
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's fair to say we don't really see a lot of business that is classified as being socially responsible. It's if something is, let's say, labeled as sustainable, it's predominantly green business in a way. However, when we assess business, and that means all types of credit risks, we have the sector guidelines that I just mentioned, and on top of that, there are two framework guidelines. One is on environmental protection, and the other one is on human rights. And within that human rights guideline, there is a specific set of regulations that every business that we underwrite has to follow. So like the ILO regulations, I have to admit I'm not familiar with all the detailed aspects, but it is something that is taken into account when underwriting each and every transaction. It's just when you want to do something specifically good with like positive investments or credit or surety bonds, it is rather the exception that we would see anything that fits into the S out of ESG.
True. Giel, what say you? Is obviously carbon is very geared towards the climate side of things, but obviously it has a big social impact as well. How do you see the people you work with? How do they respond on the social side of things as well?
Yeah, we have a lot of financial institutions part of our network that look at sustainability from a very broad perspective, and I think social and biodiversity and water, I think, are the main topics that arise in all their activities next to climate. And of course, often these topics are connected, like you said, Daniel. Climate has a link to social, and yeah, so it's I think it's a big topic, and it will even become bigger, this topic, over time. So but on the other hand, we see also that it's often difficult to measure, and we are fully focused on measuring, and the social side is also often more complex to measure and define metrics on that. But,
true. Yeah. One other interesting aspect, I suppose, is, and it was touched on a few times about the asset management side of things, is that insurers are, I believe, and someone correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe they're the largest institutional investor group in Europe, which means that obviously insurers have a larger amount of influence that they can push as well. Giel, what do you think on is there enough connection between, from the outside perspective, is there enough connection between the asset management side and the underwriting side?
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, I think they are also somehow siloed, because you see that, of course, there was a huge momentum on the asset management side on the climate front already. The Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance is one of the really leading initiatives globally on tackling climate change, measuring, setting targets, taking action. So I think the asset management arm have been for many years already been leading this, and with also limited methods out there on the underwriting arm, I think there's a disconnect between how far already the asset management arm is and what type of methods and metrics they use with the underwriting. And it's actually a question also to Martin, to what extent there is data sharing between those two parts of the business, if that's even allowed. So, because I know that the asset management arm has quite some data, of course, available, and to what extent can the insurance underwriting make use of that, and is that shared in your organization, for instance, Martin?
Jill, yeah, I can echo that there is a lot of silo thinking here. Apparently, that's true for Swiss Re, and I assume that's also true for other large insurance companies. We have access to some of the data, but the more fundamental issue is that we are in most circumstances talking about completely different risks, because the asset management, our asset management focus is really on highly rated entities, whereas in credit and surety our focus is simply a different one. So from the risk side, there is little overlap, and also from the size of the company in many cases. So I think we still can learn a lot from our asset management colleagues, but on the other hand, there's also a lot of work to be done to make data available that is tailored to meet the needs of smaller, medium-sized companies, which are the main risks in credit and surety.
Yep.
Pablo, welcome your views on what you just heard as well, but also I suppose this is one of the areas where greenwashing can become a pitfall, that you are dirty on one side of your balance sheet and very green on the other side of your balance sheet. Is that something that IOPA has a view on, or in general, what are your thoughts on that?
Yes, thank you. And just to come back on this last point about the link between the asset and the liability side, that was one of the points we identified in 2019 when we issued our opinion on sustainability and Solvency II. Is we really saw, but we encourage, it's just an opinion, but we saw indeed a need for companies to actually share information in their organization on sustainability risks and factors, because I think this reflects the fact that sustainability risks are a new type of risk where everybody can benefit from being in the loop of identifying these risks, and then they can have different impacts and you can take them into account differently in your underwriting or in your investment. But let's face it, it is a bit reputation wise, it could raise questions. If you underwrite unsustainable business while disinvesting in that same type of business, but there are always different reasons, and we have to also acknowledge, but I think there's definitely a benefit of sharing information on the sustainability risks themselves. It does require, and you see that also in some companies, they have these sustainability risk offices, which should normally then really help the risk management in the different areas to identify these risks. And then greenwashing, well, greenwashing is then more the external part of it. It's when the insurer really decides to is obliged to disclose or report on the share of sustainable activities, and that's of course I think the key. Well, the importance of this disclosure is really that we are able to measure the progress towards transition, and that we have to realize it's not about just having the reporting and the disclosure. It's really that at some point we are able to measure as a country, as the European Union, as the global world, on standardized standards, whether we're progressing and whether we should actually gear the transition and take different measures. So that's why it's so important, this reporting and this disclosure. And of course the risk is for certain reputational reasons, but also because of lack of understanding or lack of standardized measures, that greenwashing can have different shades of green. In that sense, you can be well, of course, you can have a company who willingly misleads its investors or its policyholders. That's different from having too qualitative, fluffy reporting or disclosure. And we're working on greenwashing. We're actually waiting for a commission to come back to us to ask the ESA, so ESMA, EBA, EIOPA, to identify what are the supervisory powers and tools to actually address potential greenwashing. But the starting point for that is actually to have disclosures and to start looking at them, and we don't have them yet. Thanks.
Yeah, when looking at our survey results, I think reputational risk is definitely one of the biggest things that people talk about, and you could put that down as to an extent wanting to look good rather than necessarily be good. But I think it also is about societal pressure and the positive effect that societal pressure has on large financial institutions, insurers, and so on. To what extent can insurers use that pressure and turn it into something positive? What is the role, Martin, would you say, as someone who works in the industry? How do you see your personal role involved in these discussions?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I want to respond to what Pamela said, that we shouldn't like be green on the one side of the house and write not sustainable business on the other side of the house. The policies that I just mentioned, that are in place for the whole house. So we would not, in the underwriting side, write not sustainable business, or that it's just the writing of positively contributing business is more advanced on the asset management side because it's easier to choose and there's more data available. But I would want to avoid that the impression that we might do dodgy things on the underwriting underwriting side.
Yeah, so I think so. One of the points I think is coming across is that transparency is an important aspect of this, and
Yeah.
I suppose that's something that having these kind of discussions is an important part of. I know that's something that,
Yep.
that you're promoting as well.
Yeah.
To what extent do you feel that there is a movement from financial services businesses to be more transparent on this, and to what extent do you think it's a genuine effort?
Yeah, I think that's one of the key reasons why financial institutions join the PCAF. They want to, and that's also why PCAF was initially created, because financial institutions that started PCAF noticed that they were using different methodologies and different and were disclosing in different metrics, which led to a very intransparency to their stakeholders. So they decided to collaborate to harmonize the way they measure and the type of disclosures they make, and that's, I think, also key for the greenwashing topic, because when you collaborate on a global level with a huge number of financial institutions to develop a harmonized way to measure and disclose, that of course is also a great way to prevent greenwashing, because yeah, you could, as a financial institution, you could be criticized when you develop your own methodology and use that to say, well, this is green in our opinion. Yeah? But if you would do that collectively as an industry-wide initiative, of course you have to be open and go through a very thorough process of public consultation and scrutinize to get your methodologies scrutinized. But in the end, if you come to a final method, then that helps also to prevent greenwashing. Yeah, and transparency is really key. We see that across the globe, in all regions, that regulatory and supervisory authorities are moving to mandatory disclosures. In the US, in Japan, the TCFD, there's a great momentum around the TCFD to measure climate-related risks and opportunities. And also with the establishment under the IFRS of the International Sustainability Standard Board, which also well, uses a similar framework as the TCFD, you see that there is a huge momentum on mandatory disclosure to drive transparency and to get this information out to make investment decisions and to bring this information into your well, decision-making process on the underwriting, but also on the asset management side.
I see we have a couple of questions which are getting some popularity in the chat as well. I think, Martin, you're probably the best person to start with some of those, but they're about things like decommissioning bonds, which on the one hand make sure the restoration of the environment is there, but on the other maybe provide support to industries with a poor carbon footprint. What's your thoughts on things like this? Do you consider them to be ESG friendly, for example?
I mean, there's not a general yes or no to that question. So clearly there's some industries which are carbon intensive, but which are necessarily economic activities also in the long run, and we would probably continue to support those where the individual risk is reasonable. On the other hand, there is activities where we think that are not economical viable in the long run and not sustainable, meaning, for instance, thermal coal projects where we would also not support reclamation bonds because they are actually necessary to keep the activity alive, which we think in the long run is not desirable. And then there is a lot of gray zones, but fair to say sustainability is never a black and white story. I think we have clearly defined what we will not do and support, but on the other hand, there is also a lot of things that just need to become better, but they will never be 100% green, but we still need them. There's a lot of raw materials, for instance, that are needed to for the energy transition. And it's not, it's without question that Swiss Re can't simply step out of all of those related activities, because it would have a tremendous negative impact on the overall economy, as well as on the achieving the goal set for the energy transition.
For sure. Pamela, I can see you agreeing with that. Do you have any comments? You're on mute for them.
Yes, as Martin says, economically viable activities, indeed you have the risk of climate change to society, but you also have the risk of the transition towards more sustainable societies. And especially if you want to achieve just transition, you have to actually get involved in the transition of also non-sustainable activities and how this is managed. So this is the question we often receive. How can you not underwrite economically viable activities, because the risk of not providing insurance cover is also there. So I understand that. It's just what I hope is that in the end you will have sustainable insurance activity in a sustainable economy. That you cannot, but that's where we are not today, and it's indeed difficult to reach it in each and every sector.
Yeah, and I think some of the events that we're seeing in the last few days points at questions of energy security in the future as well as just general physical security. And I think these are really important questions that we all have to work on. There are probably greener technologies that we would ideally like to be using, but then there's getting to that point where they can make up a large part of the grid, for example. Please make sure we've only got a couple of minutes left, so if you have any more questions, drop them into the chat and we'll try to get to them with the time we have left. One thing as we're coming towards the end is looking towards the future. What do you expect, Kiel? How do you see this going? Where do you see the sustainability topic moving to next? What's your hope for the future, basically?
Yeah, I think well, the action part is really, to my opinion, key. We can measure and we can develop methodologies, but in the end we need action. We need to drive the transition through finance, and we have built the current economy on finance, so let's finance a green economy. And yeah, so I think moving fast to action, and especially also on the solution part. I like Martin's comment in the beginning, digital solutions. I think also there's a lot of opportunities there to drive the transition. So I really look forward to new innovative products from the financial sector to drive the transition.
And over to you, Martin. Do you see your job changing much as a result of sustainability?
Well, I mean, we will see new risks appearing, and I think then the question of data definition and measuring sustainability, that's the key challenge for the upcoming years. In the long run, I see the insurance sector as a sector that will drive actually the sustainability agenda by underwriting risks, by providing research and digital solutions. For instance, we have developed a tool called CatNet, where you can actually model natural catastrophe risks in different climate scenarios globally. So that is something that is really helpful for businesses and countries across the globe. And we will also further improve our offering on parametric digital natural catastrophe risk offerings. So I think there is a role to play for us, and the only thing I'm sure with, it's going to be a couple of very interesting years with a lot of change ahead of us, and yeah, I'm actually excited about that.
Yeah, and Pamela, I suppose a lot of that change will be spurred by you and your colleagues, and across the Commission, across other regulators as well. Where do you see your agenda going, and what are your thoughts for the future?
Well, this is a difficult moment, of course, because what I think as a regulator, we have to make sure that we come to to regulatory stability also soon. And I think what EIOPA can contribute to is really to support the framework for the risk assessment. So to really make sure that there is convergent supervisory practice on how the risks are assessed, or how companies, also smaller companies, can be supported in making this transition to identifying sustainability risks. I think the second point is very important, is that we keep also really looking at the protection gaps, and to really continue engaging or increase our engagement with insurers on how risk prevention can be embedded in the product design and in the underwriting strategy, because that's really, maybe we are too concerned, maybe the industry not, but it's really about the sustainability of the insurance sector itself. If risks become larger and larger, we've seen it in the pandemic, we've seen it in the United States with the wildfire. Insurance sometimes does not have the capacity, or has not built up the capacity. And then you come into the third aspect of increasingly discussing risk transfer or risk sharing. And then we have this very big topic of public-private initiatives, be it from informing each other's risk assessment to actually sharing financial capacity. And then we're in a completely different situation. So before the insurance, before we come to more of these solutions, we really want to make sure that there is also sufficient prudential, I wouldn't say leeway, but a sufficiently stable prudential framework for incentivizing risk prevention. So, and that requires innovation. I'm sure indeed it will be very, very interesting, and we're learning as we go.
Yeah, and we don't have time for it, sadly, but there's a question there which I'll actually turn around into my sort of closing remarks, which are, you need to find the opportunities in this as well. I think that's a lot of it. There are challenges, but there are also huge opportunities, and that's the challenge to the industry and to everyone involved in it, is to find those opportunities and to take them. And equally, that there must be a global approach if this is done. It's not something that you can do in one country or in one company. It has to be done across the board. But thank you very much to Maarten, to Giel, and to Pamela for your contributions. And thank you very much to everyone in the chat for your excellent questions and for following us along. We have another session later today. Please register for that if you haven't already. That's looking at future expectations in the surety market and discusses some of the other the survey results that we had recently. So please check that out. Other than that, thank you very much and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.